Welcome everyone to another live episode of Level Up Law, where every Tuesday at noon here at South Carolina Legal Services, we are leveling up your legal knowledge about an area of law that we practice in. I'm Senior Staff Attorney Susan Ingalls. Our producer, Kenneth Elliott, is off today, and Sally and Pat are here with us in the background to make sure everything goes smoothly. And you are viewing here our South Carolina Legal Services Director of Litigation and Training, Mark Fessler, and also Martin Watson. Martin is a HUD Certified Housing Counselor, and he is the Community Relations and Fair Housing Coordinator at the Human Relations Commission of Greenville County. So welcome to you both. April is Fair Housing Month, so Mark and Martin have teamed up to share some information about fair housing. What does it mean? What is a fair housing complaint? When should you file one, and how does that process happen? And hopefully in the process, we'll be learning a lot about the Greenville County Human Relations Commission and what they do when it comes to fair housing and how they are serving the citizens of Greenville County. But before we get started, we do want to remind you, as always, that this is not legal advice. We are not your lawyer. It's just general information for the public. If you need the help of a lawyer, though, you can certainly contact South Carolina Legal Services if you have a legal problem about this or anything else that might be something that we can help with. And we'll give you all that information at the end of today's presentation on how to contact us, as well as how to contact the Greenville County Human Relations Commission. So also, just as a reminder, all of our episodes are recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. So if you want to take another look at this to make sure you've got all the information right, you can certainly do that. It is possible that we might have time for questions today. It just depends. And so if you want to put a question down in the question box, please feel free to do that. And also, just real quick, we always want you to like and subscribe on all of our social media channels, and we'll give those to you at the end of the presentation also. Now, you do see a QR code on your screen, and you can scan that right now and sign up to get our South Carolina Legal Services newsletter. Check that out. We'll give you that QR code again at the end of the presentation. Here's another QR code. We always want our audience to let us know what you want to hear about, okay? We have topics that we choose and can talk about, but if you have an idea and want to suggest a topic for an episode of Level Up Law, I'll give you a couple of seconds to scan this QR code and send us a recommendation, and we will do our best to see if we can help out with that. All right, so now I am going to change to our guests and give them the opportunity to share their screen so that we can get started with the presentation. Welcome, you guys. We're so glad to have you here. I think this will be a really great topic for Fair Housing Month. Exactly the topic that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. That was a nice introduction. And, we've been doing Level Up Law for several years now, but it never occurred to me until just recently that we should invite the Greenville County Human Relations Commission to talk to us about what they do. Me and Martin talk with some regularity about cases, fair housing or not fair housing, just all sorts of different types of cases where our, clients have overlapping interests. And it occurred to me, for this Fair Housing Month, that it would be a good idea to just have a conversation and kind of figure out exactly what does Greenville County Human Relations Commission do related to fair housing. I know that the commission is very active in the community and has been a vital cornerstone of community relations for many, many years, for as long as I've been practicing law. And I've known, Martin for many years. So, I want to thank you for coming on and agreeing to talk to us for a little bit and give us an idea, an insider's view into sort of how it works behind the scenes.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
And so the first thing, in case there are some people on here that don't know what the commission is, kind of give a general idea of what the Greenville County Human Relations Commission does in the community, just in general.
Okay. Greenville County Human Relations is a small organization that does big things. It started about 52 years ago during the civil unrest, the civil rights movement and everything that was going on there. It was put here to kind of help ease the tension during that time. Since that time, we have been basically responsible making sure that the communities knows what's going on with different things when it comes to fair housing, making sure that the tenants knew their rights as well as the landlords, providing assistance to those who are in need when it comes to rental assistance, just a whole lot of things that a lot of people didn't know about Greenville County Human Relations, that we're there to help the community. And basically that's what it is, community relations. And I do a lot of things going out. We have probably about 12 employees all together here that you would not know. Everything from helping with mortgages, education on credit, building their credit, making sure they're financially stable. We just do a whole lot of things when it comes to landlord-tenant issues. There's a host of things that we just do here that a lot of people are not known, and I appreciate you giving us this platform to basically let people know exactly what Greenville County Human Relations does.
Well, and I know, the commission does have a footprint in the community that's much broader than legal services. People will come to us. They'll have talked with Gina Wong over at the Human Relations Commission and about housing matters, and they won't even know who we are, and they'll be like, well, how did you find out about legal services? Oh, well, Human Relations told us about you. So we're glad that we can kind of reciprocate there and highlight the good work y'all do as well. As far as housing counseling goes, because I know that's something that y'all have. Do y'all have housing counselors on staff, and what do you do kind of generally related to housing counseling?
Well, when it comes to housing counselors, you got the housing counselors, you got the financial counselors, but when it comes to housing counseling, a lot of times the issue comes up where they're renting and there are things that they're not sure how to handle certain things, and we basically counsel them on that, making sure that they make the right moves, making sure that they're not being discriminated against, making sure that they feel comfortable in the place that they're in. Housing counseling can also take the appearance of helping those individuals with rent sometimes. So it's a lot when it comes to housing counselors, even down to housing counselors just does not stop at the counseling, but say if these people have been paying more or spending more than they should be. We actually have a department that deals with the financial empowerment center that helps them to budget their money in order to making sure that they're able to pay their rent, that they're able to use the money for the things they should be using and not spending on things that they shouldn't. When it comes to housing counselor, it can go into many facets of directions, I should say. But the biggest thing is we try to make sure that everyone is fairly taken care of and understand their rights when it comes to being a tenant or a homeowner. We also have, I don't know if you know, but we also have what they call first-time homebuyers education classes that we teach. Once a person is ready to buy a home, we make sure that they understand their responsibility as a homeowner and what it takes to maintain a home, because one thing we want to make sure of is that when they buy a home, that they're able to stay there and not, a few months, a few years later, go into foreclosure, things like that. So we want to make sure that every aspect of home ownership, every aspect of renting, making sure that they know all their rights, financially empowered. We want to make sure that they have all those things. That's why I say it's a small organization, but we do a whole lot of stuff. We do big things, should I say.
Yeah, everything you've mentioned there is very important. You know, looking at these kind of situations from the legal point of view, we don't often have the time to really get into how do you budget, you know, what is a promissory note, what is a mortgage, the kind of education you might get at the first time home buyer event that you were just talking about there. So I think what y'all do and what we do as legal services representing individuals kind of goes hand in hand. You know, there's a little bit of overlap, but we're kind of marching along the same lines there too. And it's a great service. You know, I'm sure there are maybe similar organizations in other counties throughout the state, but you know, I'm not personally aware of one that does the level of work that the Human Relations Commission does in other counties. So it's a great benefit, Greenville, you know, to have that benefit, and it's free, right? You don't charge for any of these services, right?
We do not charge when it comes to counseling. We do not charge. The only thing that we charge for is basically home buyers education class, and that's only because we have to actually provide materials that, you know, cost us. Being a nonprofit, we have to make sure that we can afford those things so that we continue to serve other individuals. But as far as the counseling, for as the financial empowerment center, when you start talking about lowering your increasing your credit score and budgeting, and you know, lowering your bills and stuff, all that counseling is free. And a lot of people don't realize that, because a lot of times they spend a lot of money on different agencies to get their score raised, their credit score raised, when they don't really have to.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's important as well, that there's a lot of expertise that you don't necessarily have to break the bank to pay for when you're already cash strapped. I mean, a lot of people coming to you and coming to us already don't have significant or perhaps any financial resources. So it's a great resource. Well, let's pivot now sort of the topic of the hour and talk about fair housing. I know it's something that y'all do a good bit of, but just for people who may not know what fair housing is at all, kind of give an overview or a brief discussion of what fair housing is in general.
Well, I like to sum it up into one statement: the ability to live where you want, as long as you can afford it, without being discriminated against. And I think that's probably the best way to say fair housing: the ability to live where you want without being discriminated against. And that's a lot of things that we see on a regular basis, people wanting to live here or here. And that means buying or renting. There's a lot of things goes into fair housing. When it comes to discrimination, it happens on a regular basis. And one of the biggest things we find when it comes to discrimination is those who have disabilities. You know? So it is definitely, if you could, like I said, if you could sum it up to one thing, it's saying I can live where I want, I can get the credit, you know, that I need without being discriminated against because of my color, my race, my religion, familiar status, national origin, disability, or sex.
Yeah, you just mentioned some specific categories there. So does fair housing cover all types of discrimination, or is it limited to just certain specific types of discrimination?
Well, the Fair Housing covers those. The Fair Housing Act basically has certain characteristics that are protected. And those characteristics are sex, race, color, religion, familiar status, national origin, and disability. Now, basically, you know, in 1968, when that was put into place, they wanted to make sure that these were the things that was actually being discriminated before the Fair Housing Act, where a person of color would be ousted to be living in a certain neighborhood because of their color. Okay. And I think at that time you couldn't get a certain loan because of your race, which they would have deemed this area here. They would not give loans, and it's usually in the predominantly low income or you know, minority areas, and they would call that redlining. Fortunately, those things are not as prevalent now, but things like that still exist. But those are the things that, we basically try to make sure that people are aware of whenever they're trying to buy a house, because a lot of people don't know they're being discriminated against. And that's where we come in to give them that knowledge.
And it seems like, discrimination that is illegal under the Fair Housing Act can be very subtle, like you say. And so you may not know, if somebody's talking to you or they're not being overtly racist or sexist or whatnot, what's really going on behind the scenes. But I just thought it was interesting that, do you see a lot of this, that there's a misconception that fair housing is maybe broader than it actually is? I mean, it's fairly broad as far as those 7 categories you talked about. But some clients that I've spoken to believe that it can apply to kind of any dispute between you and the landlord.
No.
You see these kind of situations come in, like somebody, my landlord's a jerk, he didn't treat me right or something, I'm going to file a fair housing complaint. Do you see those kind of?
I see it all the time. Mark. And that's one of the things that when education comes into play, we have to make sure they understand. Because one thing that we have to be cognizant about is we have to be right in the middle. We can't play for one side or the other. We have to be right in the middle when it comes to the law of fair housing. Because a lot of things that come here, well, my like you said, my landlord's a jerk and y'all should do something to him. Well, what is it that you do? Well, he just talks to me any kind of way. He doesn't answer the phone. He doesn't do, and that's not fair. And see, then I have to kind of basically bring it back to it. Well, why do you feel like he's doing that? Well, he just doesn't like me. Okay. And the whole thing, we have to make sure they understand that if it's not falling into one of those categories and you're being discriminated because of that, that may be just the person's character or the policies that they're using. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's discrimination. And you got to make sure that they understand that, because a lot of the misconception of the Greenville County Human Relations Commission is that we govern all rental or, rental facilities, that if this person, they're doing bad, then we need to go in and change their, sure, they hire bad people sometimes. Sure, they have people with, bad attitudes. But again, that's not our job to fix their attitude. Our job is to make sure that they are aware when they're being discriminated against and help them to stop that act. But You're right. There are situations at all times where people think that, he's charging me double. He's doing this right here. Or, my lights are cut out. I mean, we get things like, hey, it's not fair. They cut my lights out. Then we find out the bill wasn't paid, So, but you got to make sure that they're aware of that. And you got to make sure the point that they understand what fair housing is versus what a bad, a bad character of a landlord is,
Right. And I think it's also interesting that not all unfair situations, I mean, you can have an objectively unfair situation that may not be discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. Just as an example, in some jurisdictions, it might be illegal to discriminate against unmarried couples living together. So basically your boyfriend, girlfriend.
Right.
And, in some jurisdictions, it might be illegal to say, well, you can't live together if you're unmarried. But that's not the law in South Carolina or under the Federal Fair Housing Act.
Right.
So that may seem like an unfair rule that a landlord might have, but it wouldn't be necessarily illegal in this jurisdiction or in some other jurisdictions, whereas it might be illegal in states that have adopted that as one of the categories of illegality under their state Fair Housing Act. So I also like to point out that you can have unfair situations that are not necessarily fair housing issues.
Right.
To people, just to make that clarification.
And that's one of the things and you're absolutely right, because with that situations that they come in so many different types of scenarios, I have to sometimes sit back and think. And there's a lot of times I've called you and say, Mark, what is the statute on this right here? Because it does make you think, is that, so we have to really be very noticeable what's going on, because it can easily fall into that realm to thinking that it is, and then it's really not, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And these, it's important to have the discussion about fair housing because it sounds like a mantra, something that you might put on a meme, fair housing, but it can be complex. It requires thought and analysis and consideration of all the facts that you can put together and looking at the law and things like that. But I'm wondering, what kind of complaints do y'all typically see come through the Human Relations Commission in your typical year? Do you see a lot of disability, race, religion? What kind of complaints do y'all typically tend to see?
Well, that's a good question. The majority of the ones we see are disabilities. And
Okay.
as you know, disability is the largest complaints, not only just in South Carolina, but in the nation. It's usually disability. But we also see things such as race. We have a few of those, and we see sometimes familiar status. And I guess a lot of things you don't think about is sex when it comes to harassment. We do see those things too. I think during the COVID situation, when a lot of people couldn't pay their rent, you had a lot of situations of where the landlord would be asking for favors in order to subsidize the rent, quid pro quo. So those are the things we do see on a regular basis. We average probably altogether for a year, we may see over 100 cases or hear different cases, but the ones that are actually that's going to be sent up, you probably running about 45 to 50 that would actually be sent up,
Wow.
as true cases. So there's a lot of them out there, and we hear a lot of the gamuts of different things, but that would probably be the biggest, the disabilities and the race card. Yeah.
And even though, so y'all are the Greenville County Human Relations Commission, but are you limited just to Greenville County when you're dealing with the fair housing part of your work?
Well, not necessarily. We do, a lot of people know about us here in Greenville County, but being that fair housing is a national act, from all over, we get calls from all over South Carolina sometimes. And I've had calls, Myrtle Beach calls us about situations that they feel that was discriminated against. And we treat them the same way. I think there's sometimes, I think there is also another facility in Charleston, but I don't know, we get calls from all over, even out of state. We have people call from out of state saying, I pulled up this here and we saw your name on it, and I just want to see if you could help us with this right here. So a lot of times I try to refer them back to that state, but then, certain things, if it's pretty fast or whatever, I basically say, okay, what do you have? And we try to make sure that we can accommodate them if possible.
Well, you almost have a pretty good Google presence if you're getting calls from, I don't know, Florida or Georgia or wherever.
I don't know what it is, but we get them from all over. And that's a good thing, though. That's a good thing because, people know who we are. And one of the things we try to do the best for making sure that, situations are taken care of. So it's not necessarily quantity, but more the quality.
Right. I also know that it's illegal to retaliate against somebody who is asserting a fair housing right. So if somebody says, I think I've been discriminated against, I'm going to go talk to the Human Relations Commission, and then, y'all maybe reach out to the landlord. Do y'all see cases where, a housing provider retaliates against somebody? Hey, I'm not doing that to you. You're going to pay for that. Do you see retaliation at all ever?
We see that quite a lot, especially those people that are basically on a month-to-month lease.
Right.
Because they feel like, okay, I can just go ahead. I mean, she's a person on a month-to-month lease and they're causing me trouble. I'm just not going to, renew their lease. And therefore we have to get involved there. I can tell you a short story on that if you got time here. We had a situation where the young lady was complaining about the landlord, and the situation was legitimate. So I called the landlord and said, hey, we got this situation. You've been, you basically right now are in violation of a Fair Housing Act. This is the situation. We want to make sure that you are taking care of this, in a reasonable amount of time. So the landlord forgot to hang up his phone. Okay. And here I'm still on the phone. Oh, she's going to do this. Well, I'm going to get rid of her right now. He used some expletives there. And so I said, Mr. So-and-so, you're still on the phone. And if you do that, you're going to really be in some serious trouble because retaliation is against the law. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, I won't do it. So that right there, just for him doing that, just secured her for not getting, because he didn't realize he was on the phone doing that. But yeah, retaliation is a big part of fair housing because the landlord thinks that, well, since they're going to do that, I'll just get rid of the whole situation by just getting rid of them. But they don't realize that just caused more problems because now they not only violated two things, now they got a retaliation on it also.
Right. And the retaliation can exist even if there wasn't discrimination, or at least provable discrimination in the initial instance.
Exactly.
So, I think all this indicates a very, very, very strong federal and state policy to not discriminate based on the protected characteristics and to cooperate in the process. Look, if there's no smoke, there's no fire, all right, complaint closed, whatever. But, you got to participate in the process.
Exactly.
I think that's kind of the take-home message that I get when I read the retaliation rules.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's move now to kind of talking about what a fair housing complaint is, kind of what it looks like, what are the steps in the process, and what human relations role in that process is. So you gave me a kind of outline that y'all had put together. So I'm going to try to pull that up. Let's see here. All right, are you able to see that?
Yes.
So kind of walk us through, just in general, what the process looks like. So I guess somebody, has a claim or a belief that there's been some discrimination, and then what happens?
Okay. Well, normally when we have a situation where somebody feels like they have discrimination, we come in for an interview. We sit there and talk to them, find out exactly what's going on. We make sure that what they're basically saying is a discrimination is actually discrimination. And we basically, as we're doing this, we're educating the client also. We do the intake part of it. We take all the information so that once it goes up, they will be easy to contact the respondent, know who the complainant is, understand all the situations that's going on. Now, as you can see there, new inquiries received must be completed in 20 days. That doesn't mean the whole issue must be completed in 20 days, but the intake process must be completed in 20 days, which means they've contacted the complainant. They've contacted the respondent, and that basically what all that takes place, and they got to make sure, when I say making sure that this is a complaint, that it is a fair housing complaint, that it meets one of those 7 criteria that you see there.
Right.
You got the, like I said, race, color, national origin, religion, familiar status, disability, sex. As long as it meets that, then it can proceed as a fair housing complaint, which means they've been discriminated because of one of those characteristics there. So once it gets there, once the complaint is filed, then it goes to, we send it up and it goes to HUD, okay? And what normally happens is that HUD will look through it and everything, and they will send it to the closest, fair housing enforcement agency, which is down in Columbia, which is the Human Affairs Commission, South Carolina Human Affairs Commission. So they will then look at those different complaints and find out where they fall. How urgent is this person getting ready to get evicted, or is this the disability discrimination? which is causing them to be threatened far as danger to them, they put those on the top burners there so they can get with them faster and making sure that they try to resolve it and understand everything. So once all that done is put into what they call a HIMS, which is it's a database to where all the complaints would be going, and they look up through that to make sure that complaint has not already been put in, okay? So they don't duplicate it. So once they've put all that in, everything is done, then they do the drafting, you know, as far as says making sure that there's no difficulties or no duplicates. They'll send a letter out to the complainant to say, hey, this is a complaint that we received, and we want to make sure that everything is correct. So they actually make a copy of it, send it back to the complainant, and review it with them and ask them to sign it. Once they sign it, it becomes a legal document saying this is what you're saying is going to happen. And then once they do that, they move from there and start doing the investigation. They would actually contact the respondents, and you basically been, you know, have a complaint against you. What do you say? You know, they get all the different information. The biggest thing is getting all information. Once the respondent, or after they do all that, now this could take about 100 days to complete. Okay. Here in South Carolina, they look at it 180 days. It needs to be put in within 180 days. Anything after 180 days, they send it up to federal HUD. Okay, if it's done locally. But once all that is done and there is a resolution, they will basically first try to advocate or mediate the situation to find out what they can do there. But if it comes to where there is actually a punitive damages or whatever, then they will get with the landlord or whoever's doing the discrimination. And there's a lot of different penalties that can take place. That can be fines, counseling. There's just different things that might take place to where not just one person may get fined, maybe a host of people, according to how deep it goes. But that's just to kind of walk through how that works.
I think you made an interesting point, or a good point there with the time limit, because under state law, you're right, there is 180 days from the date that the discriminatory act occurs for somebody to bring an action based on that issue. And under federal law, I believe it's 1 year. So it's not a lot amount of time.
Right.
You know, if something has happened to a tenant, the tenant needs to move on that or risk the possibility that they forfeit the right to bring that issue up or to raise that issue, you know, substantially down the road. Now, as far as the process that you're walking through here, so human relation commissions, y'all don't actually do the whole process that we've talked about. Y'all do.
No.
So what part do y'all help with?
We basically we try to make sure first we do the intake part that comes where you actually take the information and we send it up. And then we also try to advocate or mediate before, I should say, a general meeting to where we can actually talk to the landlord and the tenant, come up with a viable situation, such as the person says they feel like they've been discriminated because of this right here. And it's not really a major situation, but it allows us to contact that landlord. Now, because you gotta remember, we have to be in the middle, so therefore we have to educate both sides. There's
Right.
been plenty of times where we called the landlord and they didn't realize that was discrimination, you know,
Right.
such as charging a fee for a person with a disabled or an animal for, you know, for their help, you know, charging a fee for that, and they have they're disabled and uses an animal, emotional support animal or whatever, they're charging that fee. A lot of them don't know that they can't do that. So that's where we actually try to educate them. And 9 times out of 10, once they understand that, we can resolve the situation before it goes any further.
That's
So
good.
we try to be right there just before it goes to that next level.
Right. And so then if it goes, when you say you submit it to HUD, who is actually doing the the work of the drafting or the, contacting the complainant to make sure their statement is correct? Who does that?
That's the job of the South Carolina Human Affairs down in
Okay.
Columbia.
So they have like an investigator
We have
or
investigators
process.
there that actually do the investigating. What they will do is contact the respondent and do an investigation. It could be situations, and I don't know if they still do that now, but I do know at one time they did testing to where they create the same situation that's happening just with different people that are on their staff, or they create a same situation where they would go out there and see what happens and find out if that's actually happening the same way. And if it is, then therefore they will move on to different charges or whatever.
And as far as resolving these kind of complaints, either formally through the administrative process or informally through a discussion or mediation, I think you said 9 out of 10 of them tend to get resolved. Was that so? Most of them, or the vast majority, tend to get resolved. Is that correct?
Well, a lot of them are getting resolved. Now, the only problem we have that we do find, we do a follow-up with our clients.
Right.
Okay. A lot of times when we call and there's situations such as landlord-tenant issues that just right on the brink of discrimination, we call because of our name. We seem to get a lot of things taken care of. We have sometimes where the tenant says, well, I call them, and every time, even though I tell them the problem, they just don't call me back or whatever, they ignore them. Right. So therefore, when we make that call, we basically identify ourselves as Greenville County Human Relations, and saying, hey, this may be a possible HUD violation, and we get a call back, normally from the general manager, not necessarily, or should I say the regional manager, not necessarily the local,
Right.
because we realize that when a person is dealing with a situation like that, they sometimes just say, okay, I'm just going to ignore that, hoping they'll go away. But that's not the way the Fair Housing Act works. It doesn't go away because now you've actually started a violation. So we want to make sure that we get in contact with the people that needs to get in contact with, and then without having it go to that next level, because again, certain things can be easily taken care of just by a phone call. But if it does go to that next level, we have no problem sending that up either. But a lot of them do get resolved, before it gets to the next level.
Yeah, I tend to find that that's kind of a truism as well in law. I mean, if we can agree on the rules that apply and we can agree on what happened, the resolution to that is usually 1 + 1 = 2, pretty self-evident. It does the math for itself. So it's good that somebody can come in and be like, like you can come in and say, well, here's the rules and here's what I'm seeing. If you're seeing something different, let's have that discussion. But, if there isn't anything different, it seems like we need to come to a resolution, and maybe you could offer some suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
I put together 2 scenarios. I'd be happy to get your take on 2 fact patterns, because it's one thing to talk about, processes and, steps and generalities, and, people might start nodding off. But when you start to put facts to these cases, and when you start to put, people in these scenarios, it becomes a little bit more interesting. So I wonder if we could just go over 2 different scenarios with you, and kind of you give me your response or your feedback as to how you might approach these scenarios, if you don't mind. Okay. So the first one, and I will say, full disclaimer, the Human Affairs Commission posts on their website what are called conciliation agreements, I guess, and those agreements give brief snippets of the facts that went into that case. And so I modified these from some conciliation agreements I found on their website. So full disclosure. But the first one involves a parent and a child. So it's a mother and a child. And when they moved into this apartment, multifamily apartment, they were living on the 2nd floor. Child incurs a disabling leg injury, can't go up and down stairs. Mother asks that the landlord relocate them to the first floor. And the landlord basically says, well, you can reapply for another unit, when or if it's available. You got to get behind all the other applicants that have applied as well. We're not going to give you any kind of special treatment or preference. So the mother tries to continue the conversation, but the landlord, like you were just saying a minute ago, says, well, maybe she'll go away if I just don't talk to her. So stops talking to the mother. And then the mother decides to terminate the lease early, breaks the lease, relocates to a place that can accommodate the child's leg disability. And then the landlord, when they're returning the security deposit, they keep the security deposit and they say, well, we're going to charge it against your early termination fee and the rent that you still owe us. And so this mother comes into your office, and what do you see when you look at that situation?
Okay, that situation, I would like to say, first thing, I kind of wish she would have came in earlier before she moved, because we can do a whole lot better when they're still in the situation rather than they move. But because, as you mentioned, as I stated in the process, this person has a disabled son or child. Now, she may not be disabled, but because she's caring for a disabled child, she still has the rights as far as a protected class of disability. Okay. And as we stated earlier, the 180 days to actually report a discrimination or violation, that she still has that right. Now, with this situation here, the mother's already left. She moved into somewhere else that's more accommodating for her and the child. They kept the security deposit, and now they're charging her a early termination fee. Now, this is just putting more duress on that young lady and her child. So what I would be looking at is a way to first let the landlord knows, hey, this situation is a form of discrimination. She came to you asking for a reasonable accommodations, and you refuse to do that. And therefore, they can be, she can go to and basically charge you with a violation there, or have you a complaint put in. So I would be actually trying to get all the information I could from this young lady, and basically I would contact the landlord and say, hey, look, these situations happen, and I see, why are you still trying to charge her the deposit you didn't return to her, and now you're still trying to charge her the termination fee. And I already know that she's been out for a while, so I know you're still getting funds from the new tenant. So as a mark of doing the right thing, I would ask that person, the landlord, that says, okay, basically, let's look at reasonable accommodation, because you didn't offer it to them when they were there, but now you have the opportunity to offer them this, give them their deposit back, and basically stop charging them the early termination fee. And that still falls under reasonable accommodation for someone with a disability. So that's basically where I would actually try to put that, Mark.
That seems fair. I mean, because it's fine for a landlord to have an early termination policy to say, well, if you're going to break your lease early, we're going to charge you a fee. But if the reason that you had to break the lease was because of a disabled household member, and you weren't able to accommodate that person by moving them to a first floor, the law may require you to not charge the termination fee in that case, and allow them to break the lease. And hopefully, the landlord would see that, and we could, resolve that.
It's best that we do it here, rather we send it up and let the law, the government determine that you're going to have to do it.
Get involved. Yeah, I mean, that seems like one you definitely would file a complaint on if it didn't get resolved. So let me move to another one. So the other one, I know service animals are a big issue. I mean, I have clients that come in with, emotional support or service animals. So I wanted to pick out a scenario that involved one of those as well. So in this scenario, the tenant has lived in an apartment since 2016 with the service animal. But in 2021, the unit becomes, riddled with mold, and the tenant's disability starts acting up. And so the landlord finds out that the tenant has a pet. So the landlord says, well, you got to pay the pet fee. You got to pay the pet deposit, or we're going to evict you. The landlord also, in this case, had disabled online access to the tenant's portal, which is what the tenant used to pay rent and other charges. And the disabled tenant has provided documentation in this scenario. So I think it's important to point out that, just because you are disabled or have an animal doesn't mean you automatically get the service animal recognition. You do have to provide some paperwork as a tenant to the landlord to demonstrate that. But so the tenant has provided the paperwork. The tenant's also talked to the assistant manager about the failure to get access to the portal and about the pet fee. But this has not been resolved, and there's been no further communication. So in this kind of scenario, what do you see here? How do you think about approaching a scenario like this?
Okay, well, first thing I would want to find out, I want to make sure, I will look at all the documentation that they have as far as the service animal as well. The other thing is I want to find out how did they, let the landlord know that this situation, that the portal is not available, okay? Because I want to make sure that they are well aware. The other thing is that they've been there on May 16th with the service animal. I'm wondering, did the landlord change or whatever? And that's what it sounds like. Maybe there's a new landlord that took over or whatever, because that happens a lot here in Greenville, where a landlord comes over and they did not look at the past and they automatically figures that they can do what they want as far as that. That creepthorn is a service animal and they're wanting to charge a pet fee. Well, they can't charge a pet fee because that's not a pet. It's a service animal. And under the law, that animal has the right to be there without being charged a pet fee to make sure that that tenant can live a reasonable lifestyle with their animal's help. So what would happen with this, I would make the landlord aware that this is happening and they can't charge a pet fee for that tenant. I would also explain that it is a form of discrimination by trying to do that, and with them off, also turning off the portal, that makes it an undue hardship on that disabled person to where they can't even pay their rent, which is going to cause them now, they're going to be looking for late fees and trying to evict them because of that. And all this is because the landlord's decision to do this, and they're part of not knowing that they can't do this. Or they may do know it, they just feel like they can do what they want. And that's the biggest thing we find in Greenville. People now, when all the houses and stuff was up for sale and everybody wanted to be a landlord.
Right.
Everybody jumped into that pile. I want to be a landlord, and they didn't know nothing about the fair housing or what they could do. And then it was talking about just rampant when it came to violations.
Right.
So, like I said, with them, biggest thing is getting all the information first, making sure the landlord knows everything that's going on and knows that they can't do these things, and hoping that the landlord does the right thing. If not, then we move to the next level.
Right. And you also mentioned a point I want to emphasize there, that, the Fair Housing Act applies fairly broadly. It doesn't apply to everybody, but I think it's something like if you own more than 3 rental units, it applies. So,
Exactly.
I mean, if you're renting 1 or 2 rental units, but as soon as you are above 3, you're subject to the Fair Housing Act. So definitely the multifamily, but even somebody who's a mom and pop, landlord.
Right.
If you have, more than 3 units, and the units are not necessarily in your house, because there's also an exception for renting
in one.
in your house. Yeah. But it's a very broad very broad statute, and it can have serious ramifications for people who are just, kind of fly by night and not really learning what they can and can't do and taking it seriously, because it can have significant, and it has, and for good reason, because it has serious negative effects on people who are often unable to advocate for themselves. Disabled individuals may have an intellectual disability and they can't, use the right words necessarily, or speak the right language, but, somebody like you can, or somebody like me can, use the right words.
Right.
Of course. So, it is an important thing to keep in mind. In the last few minutes that we had, I wanted to ask you about, let me see here, stop showing the screen. All right, did that stop sharing?
Yeah, you good?
Awesome. In the last couple of minutes, I just wanted to talk about two things. What kind of mistakes do you see when people file fair housing complaints or try to proceed with fair housing complaints? And what kind of tips do you have for people who might be looking at, filing a complaint or trying to figure out whether they do have a fair housing issue? So, yeah.
One of the things I would say, anytime when you're filing a fair housing complaint, have all your information. Okay, have all your information. That means you got photographs of situations that's going on. You got documentation. Please keep your documentation. That is going to be a major factor when it goes to court. Recordings, you have situations where you know this is happening, or person is using, racial slurs or whatever. Have a recording of it. If they're doing it one time, they'll do it again. So just be prepared to record the next time. Witnesses, the people, people that can vouch for the situation that's happening. Have those. All these things play a major part in creating a complaint. The biggest thing I find that people make mistakes is that they don't have that, or that something has happened where they became part of it also, where, it's not necessarily cut and dry, as they say. There actually can be part of it, such as situations to where they actually uses a fair housing complaint to retaliate against the landlord, where it's not necessarily the landlord did what was supposed to be done, but they're going to make it because now they got to be evicted or whatever. They're going to say, well, they're doing this, and this. Believe me, we're going to check everything, so just be honest up front about everything so that it'll be easier for us to do. But I guess the biggest concern of them is not knowing, and that's what we're here to do, making sure that they know. Right.
And you make a very good point that applies in my practice as well all the time, is the question of evidence. Like you can tell me your story, I can understand it, but how do you prove it? And that's where evidence comes in. So when you were talking about photographs, recordings, documentation, even if it's something where maybe you didn't record it, but you heard it, humans' memories, they fade quickly. So go back and write it down. Write down exactly what was said, what the context was, when it happened, so that you don't forget it later.
Right.
Because if something does happen, but your memory is poor and you kind of can't recall it very well, then a fact finder could find that didn't actually happen, or that it's not been proved with sufficient certainty. So evidence is so key. And do you think that that's maybe the biggest, pitfall that people have, is lack of evidence, or do you see other mistakes or pitfalls that people make with these kind of?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest, and the other mistake they make is just letting it go because they think nothing is going to happen.
Right.
Rather than, they say, well, there's nothing going to happen to them anyway. We're just going to leave, and then, it's done. At least we're out of that situation. But they don't realize if it's happening to you, it's going to happen to someone else, and it's got to stop somewhere. So, you know, the ideal that they just believe that there's nothing can be done, that's a major pitfall for the whole system, I should say.
Well, we're kind of coming up on the hour here. I wanted to, you know, make sure people are aware of how they can get in touch with the Human Relations Commission. So if somebody has an issue, how would they get a hold of you? What should they do?
Well, they can call me directly. As you can see on the screen, that's our address, which is call me at Martin Watson, Community Relations Coordinator. You can call me at the office here at 864-467-7095. You can call my direct extension at 864-467-7616, or you could even call me on my cell phone at 864-561-2648. My email address is mawatson@greenvillecounty.org. That's probably the best way to get me, because you got to remember, I get calls on a regular basis, but if I have it written, I can see it better. But those are the things you can call, and we'll be glad to help you, even down to the situations where you needed financial counseling and all that. If you call me, we can make sure that we put you in the right place so that you can get that help. But we're here for you. We're here for the community, and we want to make sure that you're aware of everything when it comes to fair housing, so that you can't be taken advantage of, and that you know if you are being discriminated against.
Yeah, and I think that's very important, because you know, anybody can go on Google and Google, you know, HUD Fair Housing Complaint or SC Human Affairs Commission Housing Complaint, and they can see instructions for how they themselves can file it. But it's often good to go through an intermediary, or to touch base with, you know, an expert like Martin first, who can analyze the case and kind of see, all right, is there anything there? Is there not? Does there need to be more evidence? You know, and kind of look at it on a deeper level before the complaint gets filed, and then maybe you can, you know, mediate it informally, like you mentioned. So I want to thank you again for joining us today, and it's been a pleasure. I've learned some things that I didn't know, and you know, we've spoken, you know, many times, as I said. So this was very informative, and I hope anybody watching this got a lot of useful information out of it. So thanks again, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to both of y'all. What a fantastic presentation. Mark, as well, learned a lot, and it's so good to have this nuts and bolts kind of information, and you know, to have someone like Martin and others at Greenville County Human Relations to help walk you through that process, because they know what it's all about. Let me also take this opportunity to thank our audience for joining us here each week, as well as today, or if you're on the replay on YouTube. Thanks for joining in. We really do appreciate that.
And can I say one more thing?
Sure.
We do have a event that's coming up on the 20th. It's our fair housing event. Yes. That we would love to have you chime in. You know, you can come in and be a part of that. We have it every year. It's called the Fair Housing Event, and there are going to be multiple speakers about fair housing on that. I don't know, Mark, do you have that?
I was wondering, is the registration on your Human Relations Commission homepage?
Yes, it is. It is. They can go to our homepage.
And we'll put the link for that in the show notes from today's episode when we upload it to our YouTube channel. And we'll also, if we haven't already, which we may have, share that information out on our social media as well. Okay. Yeah, so we'll make sure that all of our viewers and listeners get that information, because that's going to be a great event. And we really, Mark, you're going to be one of the speakers on that.
Truly will be talking about the Violence Against Women Act, so you don't want to miss that part. No, it's a great event. I've done it 3 years.
Thanks, Mark, for reminding us to make sure our viewers knew about that event. That's going to be a fantastic event with a lot of good information, a lot of help for folks. So yeah, thanks again. I want to tell our audience, if you did find this presentation helpful, which I'm sure you did, and if you know, I'm sure it'll be helpful to others that you may know. So please do go to our YouTube channel if you're watching us live, or if you're on the replay, go ahead and share this broadcast, because we do, as with all of our episodes, we want as many people as possible to get such important information. And also, of course, while you're there, be sure to like and subscribe for more. And if you do sign up for those notifications while you're there, you'll get a notification each time that we post a new episode. But of course, we do want you to join us live. So watch for that on our calendar at sclegal.org and on all our social media. So you see here what we call our Connect card, and it tells you all the ways that you can connect with us here at South Carolina Legal Services. In particular, if you need our legal help, you know, here's the phone number as well as the online intake link, so you can call our intake office, which is Monday through Thursday from 9 to 6. But we're open 24/7 if you do it online. So definitely check that out. We've got the QR code here again if you'd like to join our newsletter list. And also be sure to tune in next week on Tuesday at noon for another episode of Level Up Law. We're going to be observing Second Chances Month. You know, April is Fair Housing Month. It's also Second Chances Month. And we'll be providing an overview of resources that are available to returning citizens. So definitely check us out with that. Be sure to tune in. Thanks again to Mark and Martin for an excellent presentation. Appreciate y'all being here and all the good information. And thanks again to our audience for tuning in today on Level Up Law. That concludes today's webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.